So this is a big year for our family. My mother turns 90 in December. Born in 1928, she's seen a lot of change in her life. She's obviously lived through World War. She lived through the decline of the British Empire. She's emigrated. She's grown a family. She's lived through the changes in technology. And we often ask her to share stories about her experiences. When she was a child, first thing in the morning, she was in a joint family household, and she would come downstairs and be surrounded by her cousins. Now, first thing in the morning, she sits down with her device and is surrounded by many of the same cousins that live around the world. She shares that change has never been as fast as it is today. You know, I love my mother, and we disagree about relatively little. However, I would argue that change will never be as slow as it is today, ever again. You know, what we see in terms of advances in data processing, data storage, locational access, universal connectivity, are fueling a revolution that we're seeing around us. And what we see is that we're still in the early stages of that revolution. I lead the retailer and consumer products practice for EY, and we work with everybody. So we have the advantage of working across all aspects of consumer products, fashion and luxury, beauty and personal care, food, beverages, every brand that's out there, as well as in the retail environment. So with single brand retailers, multi-brand retailers, e-commerce only players, omni-channel players, every aspect, and not only in the US, but globally. What we're seeing is that companies are continuing to try and protect what they were, as opposed to become what they need to become. And so we engaged in a global 360 view of what we saw the consumer changes to be. Not for tomorrow, which are largely a function of the structures that exist today, and not the Jetsons, which is just imagination, but something that was more, let's say, 5 to 10 years out, and get a sense of what trends we saw. We spent the time not only in the developed world, but spent time, obviously, in the developing world to see what that picture looked like and how it might be different. And we were struck by the fact that it was common in many ways, as well as different, as we looked at different geographies. So I'm not a futurist. Right? I spent 20 years as an executive that went into companies in need of transformation. Some of that transformation was because of times of distress, and some of that transformation was to take advantage of changes that the industry was enabling people to take advantage of. So what I wanted to do today was share a bit of that future with you. What we saw across the globe, what we saw across the industry, and in particular focus on what it means for retail. And what we see is the beginnings of what we see as being a potential next revolution in retail. And that's a shift or a segmentation or a distinction between what we'll call shopping, where consumers are highly engaged in their purchases, versus buying, where consumers are unengaged in their purchases. But before I get into that, let me give you a little bit more of the changes that we see. And the intent was to explore the possibilities for consumer-facing companies, to imagine how consumers in the world will respond to these changes, to find ways that companies can proactively seize this next stage of disruption. So we looked at over 100 factors that were likely to drive change in consumer-facing industries. They clustered into 8 key forces that we think will be the most powerful in propelling our future. Those 8 clusters of change revolve around the way that consumers use technology, the way they play, the way they work, the way they move, the way they eat, the way they stay healthy, the way they live, and the way they shop. In addition, we see a few key forks in the road that will have a large influence on the path that we take. For example, we see a key fork will be around the ownership and use of personal data. Will consumers continue to trade information about themselves to companies, or might consumers own their own data in a blockchain-like format and only share it with companies when they choose? The various ways these forces interact could lead to quite different futures. So we're not trying to predict the future, but see and ride the forces that will drive the world around us. Let me share a possible future in a video.
It's 10 a.m. when Sam arrives at her apartment. Yesterday London, today Berlin, a new city every month. But wherever she goes, she feels at home because her AI knows her needs. Her favorite beauty products are in the bathroom. The right clothes for today are in the wardrobe. After breakfast, Sam puts on a fresh health patch. It monitors and shares a flow of biometric data about how she's doing and how she feels. She decides to explore the neighborhood. Her AI shows that her favorite sports brand is putting on an e-event nearby. She tries on a jacket. AI confirms the supply chain is clean and the jacket is in budget. It shares her sizing details with the vendor. A tailor-made version will be waiting at the gym later. She needs to up her energy levels before her workout. In the convenience store, her AI showcases a range of curated snacks. She takes a snack and a nutritional drink, calibrated in real time to optimize her energy levels. No need to pay, AI takes care of it. In the evening, Sam goes to meet friends for dinner. She is nudged to complete a work module during her 15-minute ride. They immerse themselves in a world of curated food from Indonesia. Sam explores where the ingredients have come from and the cultural heritage behind each dish. The coffee is great, so she decides to switch brands. Her AI arranges a delivery to her apartment building. Back home, Sam checks her bank balance. It's looking healthy, so she starts to plan her next trip.
Amazingly, most everything we just showed is possible on capabilities that exist today. Let me quickly survey it for you. Right, we see technology so ingrained in day-to-day lives that it will become all but invisible. Discrete digital profiles will eliminate worries about IDs, cards, and keys. Interactions with brands will be AI enhanced. Augmented reality and virtual reality will further increase connectivity. Data and technology will enable supply chains to be more flexible and agile. We see play and work more seamlessly integrated as gamification dominates our way of living. Consumers as content producers. Social influence will be both a leisure pursuit and an income stream. Augmented reality and virtual reality increasingly interactive across entertainment and content. Gamification will make both work and leisure more productive. We see consumers doing work that fits around their lifestyles rather than separate career aspirations. Work will become more flexible and project-oriented. The gig economy will grow with cognitive platforms that match people with work based on their skills, performance, and personal goals. Administrative processes such as payments and human resource tasks will become automated. More flexible staffing. Traditional location and time constraints will be less relevant, but consumers will still crave social interactions. We see integrated transportation systems allowing travel time to be more productive. Traffic management will be reactive, so infrastructure will be driven by reported traffic results and traffic expectations. Autonomous vehicles will enable productive travel time. We see food being more transparent. Consumers will know everything about what they eat, from its source to how it affects the environment. Supply chains will become shorter and decentralized. AI advisors will curate meals based on consumer-specific health, biome, and genome data. Consumers will shift to plant-based protein diets with sophisticated taste and texture using 3D printing capabilities. Biotechnology and agriculture will merge, integrating nutrition and health. We see technology significantly helping consumers seamlessly monitor their health and improve their well-being. Data will enable mapping of lifelong mental and physical health. Health-driven products and services will function invisibly based on consumer needs. Exercise, meals, and therapies will be more personalized and gamified. It will take less conscious effort to optimize your health. We see consumers owning fewer things, instead focusing on lifestyles, services, and experiences. We see them opting for on-demand subscriptions beyond digital content services to meet real-time needs for clothing, food, and other goods. Consumers will focus on experiences as a new status symbol. Gamification, virtual, and augmented reality will further fuel this demand. Living and working spaces will merge. Now that's a lot of fundamental change. Each is a rich topic that I would love to get into, but today's focus is on retail. So let me get into what all this means for shopping. We're seeing the seeds of the next big dislocation in the consumer journey. If you go back not more than a few years, consumers invested their attention in 100% of their purchases, whether it was toilet roll, an airplane ticket, a rental car, or a fashion accessory. While the consumer journey has shifted, it still requires the consumer's attention. We see there being a growing distinction between purchases that consumers pay attention to, what I'll call shopping, and those they won't, what I'll call buying. A fundamental revolution that will disrupt the retail environment again. In some segments, the consumer will be increasingly engaged. Shopping will be experiential. Shopping will happen at retail destinations that provide differentiated, relevant goods and services in distinctive physical or virtual spaces. Experiences will crowd out items as status symbols. Shopping will be increasingly personal. Consumers will be more selective about the brands they interact with, supporting those that share their values. There'll be a close connection between the consumer's sense of self and things they will shop for. Consumers' expectations in the shopping process will increase dramatically. Whether the consumer shares their data or allows it to be used, consumers expect their personal information will enable an experience that is customized to their needs and satisfies them. Let me flip to the buying side, where the consumer will be completely disengaged. The buying process will be automatically curated and completed through AI technologies that involve personalized, sophisticated, and connected algorithms to sort, search, select, and buy items, removing the consumer from the process altogether. Let me say that again. Removing the consumer from the process altogether. Let me give a hypothetical example. Let's say batteries. I may prefer the Copper Top brand. That is, unless it's more than a 5% premium over the Bunny brand. In which case, get that one. Unless that's more than 10% premium over the house brand. That is, so long as the house brand has a review above a certain level and is made in a factory that meets good labor practices, and on and on. A bot can decide that for me today. I would like you to imagine with me how your business would be different if a meaningful portion were selected through an intelligent bot and only the remainder did you get the consumer's attention. Think for a minute about the operating model implications on the nature of your brands, the products, the price points, merchandising mix, consumer acquisition strategies, supply chain, talent, internal processes, and internal technology. How would you create and curate the consumer experience to attract their attention in the shopping segment? How would you curate and create the consumer brand to differentiate in the automated system? Every aspect of the consumer business would be disrupted. Today, most companies are still viewing the world through old distinctions, like online and physical. They're often trapped in the organizational structures and compensation systems that were built around those segments. This would be a new revolution. Whenever I speak about the future, I always remember to think about three frames: possible, probable, and predetermined. All of what I have said is possible. A lot is probable, and only some is predetermined. Nobody knows what the future will bring, but the direction of travel is clear. When leaders want to know what do we have high confidence in, I would highlight four things. First, the rate of change will never be this slow again. Second, the 8 forces we explored will disrupt the nature of the consumer business in new and revolutionary ways. Third, the next retail revolution is coming: buying versus shopping. Fourth, consumers have already changed, so any company that is still protecting who they were and not savagely transforming to become what they will need to be in the future has already been left behind. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Hi. So you mentioned the possibility of consumers taking control back of their data. How do you imagine that happening? Or how could they do that?
Well, I think it was interesting as we went around the world and talked to different places, and our expectation going into a place like China was that consumers would never think of themselves as owning their own data. We were struck when we were in Berlin, for example, and a actual thread came out, which the way I describe it is that privacy is selfish. That somehow it's suboptimized the whole, and therefore there was actually a push for data to be shared and things to not be private. Clearly, a set of the regulations that are being debated would enable the possibility of data being pushed back into people's hands in a regulatory type of an environment. I think also the economic trade-off that consumers are making is not entirely clear to them. And so we would leave open the possibility that an event occurs that potentially makes it clearer to them, an alternative gets created that opens up the possibility of being able to monetize it for yourself. And the legislative vehicles facilitate that transition. So we're not predicting that that's going to happen, but I think it's a fork that clearly could play the world out in a different way. And many business models right now are predicated on owning data. And so it's just something that from a risk perspective, we would encourage people to think about if their business model is 100% predicated on owning the data, that if that equation ever changed, it would certainly change their business model.
Thank you.
how would a company go about figuring out if their business is buying or shopping, and what would they do with that information?
It's a great question. I think that it's something that underlies everybody's business. And one thing that also I want to be clear about is we don't align those things with physical versus online. We don't think that buying is by definition online and shopping is by definition physical. And we don't think that it's by item. So it's not as if a whole sets of categories will by definition be buying and a whole sets of categories will definition be shopping. I think every business will have a mix. And the mix will change depending on what your strategy is. I expect that if everybody looked at the segmentations they already have in their customer base, there's a certain portion of your customer base that is highly engaged, associates with aspects of what you stand for and your value proposition. And you have aspects of people who are transactional and are buying it because it's a facility, it's a function, it is a service. And that's already the beginnings of that segmentation. And what we would encourage people to do is to look at that customer base and segment it in those kinds of ways and then think, what would we do if we were further disintermediated from the fulfillment to the group of people who are less engaged in our brand? How would that impact how we go to market? How would that impact the structures that we put in place? And how would we want to start to build capability on either one or both of those dimensions? One of the areas that we find companies are struggling with the most is the capital investment decision, because capital investments have long time frames to them. So if you're looking at putting in a warehouse structure, you may be dealing with 10, 15-year cycles. Physical stores in a non-pop-up setting have return cycles associated with it. And boards of directors are struggling with how do I deploy that when the consumer marketplace is changing so fast. This is an additional element that I think one wants to look through in that lens and say, okay, how should I be deploying my capital more effectively to position myself for this change that we think is coming relatively quickly.
Any other questions? Thank you.